Anybody? You said no?
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yes. Just looking at these things.
The September 6, 2022 meeting of the Monroe County Legislative District Revision Commission will now come to order. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mr. Colby.
Here.
Mr. Colby is present. Chairwoman Lamar.
Here.
Chairwoman Lamar is present. Ms. Nicolay.
Here.
Ms. Nicolay is present. Ms. Ortiz.
Here.
Ms. Ortiz is present, and Ms. Roman.
Here.
Ms. Roman is present.
Will everyone please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I first would like to thank all the commissioners, legislators, and community members that are in attendance for this very important legislative redistricting revision commission meeting. We will now proceed to the public comment forum. Mr. Clerk.
As a reminder, if you submitted a written comment, a hard copy of your comments has been provided to each of the commissioners for the review. You will have 3 minutes in which to address the commission, and please kindly conclude your remarks when the timer sounds. And there are a few members of the community that registered to address the commission. We'll begin with those. Our first speaker is Robin Wilt. You can come forward to the podium.
Good afternoon, distinguished legislators. Thank you so much for allowing this public hearing. I'm going to leave my comments off with an excerpt from Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, because I think it's incredibly important to point out what this body's legal obligation is. And I'm quite frankly offended by the thinly veiled intent that certain members of this body are engaged in to specifically target and harm Black communities by unnecessarily pitting our interests against other quote unquote minorities. It's unconscionable that members of this body from the Democratic caucus have suggested on social media that the Voting Rights Act is being used as some kind of cudgel to force something distasteful down their throats. Quite to the contrary, the language from the Voting Rights Act does nothing but articulate that in drawing compliant voting districts, this body must not be discriminatory. Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act informs us, and I quote, "Direct evidence detailing a discriminatory purpose may be gleaned from public statements of members of the adopting body or others who may have played a significant role in the process. However, smoking gun or other stark evidence of intent is rare and is not required to establish a discriminatory purpose." It continues, "Discriminatory intent implies that the decision maker selected or reaffirmed a particular course of action, at least in part, because of and not merely in spite of its adverse effects upon an identifiable minority group." The Department of Justice will draw the normal inferences from the foreseeability of a discriminatory impact, and Section 2 does not require proof that one or more government actors are quote unquote racist or bear racial animus. The fact that members of the Democratic caucus believe that a map that centers the legal principles of redistricting in accordance with Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act is being shoved down their throats actually reflects a problem with the caucus's disposition towards achieving equity and justice in the redistricting process. We should not be aiming for a map that meets the minimum criteria of the VRA when we have a map that has voters correctly apportioned to their demographic weight in the community. If by supposedly standing up for all communities of color, you're cracking and packing the Black vote, then you are not in fact standing up for all communities of color. You're just being discriminatory towards Blacks. With the exception of Black voters, the proportions of all other minority voters does not drastically fluctuate between the maps that are being proposed in the 5 majority district map. The numbers of Black voters, however, substantively shifts from being less than a 50% plurality to an outright majority in those affected districts. Other minority voters are not being packed or cracked. It is the Black vote that is being packed and cracked. It seems that the intent achieved by moving Black voters around is to suppress the Black plurality in each district so that other minority voters gain parity with the Black vote. That is explicitly invidious and illegal under Section 2 of the BRA. The problem inherent in talking about redistricting from the context of minority voters is that Blacks represent the vast majority of those minority voters. So when you discuss creating majority minority districts, it's essentially code for disproportionate and racially invidious manipulation of Black voting populations. Since no other standalone minority group has demographic concentration to warrant statutory consideration under the Voting Rights Act. I did not march in the streets to fight oppression for most of the last 2 years in order to be robbed of my voting rights by members of this body. I implore members of the Democratic caucus to be on the right side of history and vote for this 5 majority Black district map. Your intent to suppress the Black vote can already be gleaned from your statement, and we, the members of this community that support civil rights for all, will not stand idly by while you attempt to oppress our communities with immoral, unjust, and illegal redistricting schemes. Thank you so much.
Our next speaker is Terrence Schnurr.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. You've heard from me many times over the past 6 months. I'm back today because you still seem unwilling to understand the meaning of a word that I have used probably every time I've addressed you, whether in person or in writing: compact. Compact is neither a 5-cent word nor a 50-cent word. I found one website that lists it as a 6th grade vocabulary word. It comes through the French, from the Latin compingere, fastened together. As an adjective, it means occupying a small volume by efficient use of space, dense or concentrated. The legal definitions, judges, and scholars have assigned to it don't stray from that basic idea. Rather, they simply seek to make it quantifiable. Compactness is a requirement under the county charter and New York State municipal home rule law, and a key consideration in nearly every federal court decision touching on redistricting. Yet, in every map that has been made public, the May Outbridge proposal, the June 3rd BS proposal, and the map tweeted on Thursday, it is clear that no attempt was made to make districts as compact as practicable. Let me stray from my prepared remarks to also note that the Twitter proposal reduces the number of districts from that are majority minority from 6 to 5, increasing the number of majority white districts from 23 to 24, the 24th being the 21st district on the east side of Rochester. That violates the spirit of the Voting Rights Act and probably its letter. And it continues a 50+ year pattern of diluting Latino vote in the city of Rochester on the county legislature by packing and cracking. Please do not waste everybody's time by even considering the Twitter proposal. It is going nowhere, and it should go nowhere. It is long past time that this commission propose a plan. Ms. Wilt went on for about 6 minutes. I'll go on for 3.5 to 4. To propose a plan that complies with the law, with the county charter, New York state law, federal law, and the United States Constitution, and that can garner genuine bipartisan support and be enacted. If you don't, we are rapidly approaching the point where a potential candidate would have standing to ask a court to do the job you have thus far failed to do after nearly a year. Good day, thank you.
Is there anyone present who did not sign up to speak but would wish to address the commission? Please come forward and state your name.
Michael Slade. This is the 6th decade of redistricting that I've lived through. At my age, I don't expect to see another decade of it. It is unfortunate that in those 6 years, we have not seen a fundamental change in the way that districts are done. There are plans that are better, there are plans that are worse. Just the very first, this plan that you have in PDF form is better than the last. But unfortunately, you have not taken the opportunity to make it really available to the community by publishing it through Dave's Redistricting, which is the way it was written, which I have obtained a copy of. Why didn't you make it available to the public to see? Now, this plan really does not do anything for compactness. As best as I can tell, looking at Dave's restricting data, it doesn't do much for majority and minority districts. In its table, I only count 3. Somebody has said that there are 5. I don't see 5 black districts in that table where they use the voting age population by minorities as well as whites. I just don't see it there. Maybe I'm not reading the numbers right. I've seen another proposal that's kicking around that I found a Dave's Redistricting file for, which is much, much more compact. In fact, District 26 goes from the Polsby-Popper number of 0.08 to 0.23, 3 times more compact. The other districts are mostly rectangular, so that you can read them, so that a person can understand where they live and see who their legislature is. These other redistricting plans over the years, nobody can figure out. If you go up to someone and say, what legislative district do you live in? They have not a clue. They have not a clue. And it is unfortunate that that's probably a reason why we see lower turnout of county-led votes. I urge you to go back. Oh, there's another problem. Dave's Redistricting has been used for both this plan and for the one that I have seen. It's being done at the VTD level, that is voter district level. But voter districts are not exactly the equivalent of election districts. There are problems with that. But the worst problem is that the average size of the VTD is just under 1,000. Now, it's almost impossible, as we've seen, to make a compact district when the change is possible by moving 1 VTD or twice the quantity that is permissible under law, which is roughly 500. I'll only take another 30 seconds or so. There is the distinction of using census blocks. There are over 10,000 census blocks. Each census block is the equivalent of roughly 75 people. It makes it practical to draw a compact or change a district to within the 2% boundaries and still have compact, easy to read districts. I urge you not to accept the proposal that's on the table. to look at the other one that legislators seem to have in their hip pocket and ask Arkbridge to make the districts more compact without substantially changing them by using the census blocks rather than the VTTs. I see Jackie shaking her head, but I know this is going to mean more work for her, because once you get down to the census block level, you're going to have to change election districts. As we know, it's not as bad as it has been in the past, because you don't need more machines. We just need more. We don't need the lever machines. We don't need an extra one for a new election district. We just need printouts of the ballots. So I urge you to reject this one, to look at the other, and in any sense have Arkbridge make whatever one is chosen more compact. Thank you.
Anyone else that wishes to address the commission? Is there anybody else that wishes to address the commission? This concludes the public forum.
Thank you. We will now proceed to the next items on the agenda. However, both items pertain to the bipartisan map, which was distributed with a copy of the meeting agenda. Before I open the floor up for discussion on these items, I am going to offer the floor for a presentation from the Honorable County Legislator Rachel Barnhart, a key member of the bipartisan team that put together this community-driven map for presentation on how the map came to be, why it is important, and why it is before us to consider today.
Point of order,
What's your point of order?
wouldn't that have been during the public forum portion? That allows about 3 minutes of commenting.
This presentation has everything to do with the matter at hand, and therefore is overruled. Your point of order is overruled.
Okay.
Legislator Barnhart.
Thank you so much, President Lamar and members of the Redistricting Commission, and thank you to everyone who has provided comments today. We are here today because redistricting happens every 10 years. One person, one vote is a principle upon which our Constitution rests. We use census data, jurisdictions around the country do, to reapportion lines to make sure that everyone has equal representation under the law. In Monroe County, the legislature is responsible for drawing district lines. That is per the Monroe County Charter. An independent redistricting commission proposal, which I supported, has been defeated now twice. But the good news is that the current makeup of our county legislature is relatively evenly split between Democrats and Republicans, and we have a Democratic county executive who has veto power. That provides us with important checks and balances. When we do redistricting, federal laws must be followed first, then state and local laws. Federal laws include the Voting Rights Act of 1965, championed by Martin Luther King. It prohibits voting practices that result in citizens being denied equal access to the political process on account of race, color, or membership in a language minority group. We also have to look to the Constitution's 14th and 15th Amendments, which prohibit discrimination in voting rights upon demonstration of discriminatory intent. The Voting Rights Act impacts redistricting in some key ways. Vote dilution is banned. That means you minimize or cancel out the voting strength of members of racial or language minority groups in the voting population. That is typically done through packing, where you put so many members of a minority group into a district that you don't have enough majority, that you suppress their ability to form majorities in other districts. And cracking divides minority groups into too many districts where they cannot achieve a majority. The Voting Rights Act essentially says, in the simplest form, you have to create a district if it meets certain criteria. That criteria was spelled out in the 80s in a case that came before the Supreme Court called Thornburg versus Gingles. This is the Gingles test. If you pass this test, you have to draw the district. Is the minority group large and compact enough? And when we say minority group, we're talking about one race. Each race is assessed separately. Is the minority group politically cohesive? And does the white majority vote together such that they can block a minority candidate from being elected? If you pass the Gingell's test, then you look at the totality of the circumstances, the extent of any history of official discrimination by government. And I should emphasize that there's no one thing here that is more important than another. You have to look at the whole, all of this. The extent to which voting is racially polarized, the extent to which government has supported voting practices and procedures that have increased opportunity for discrimination against the minority group, the extent to which political parties have denied the minority group access to the nomination process, the extent to which the minority group bears the effects of discrimination in such areas as education, employment, and health, which hinders their ability to effectively participate in the political process, whether political campaigns have been characterized by overt or subtle racial appeals, and finally, the extent to which members of the minority group have been elected to public office in the jurisdiction. Now, when you start to draw these districts, due to the supremacy clause in the Constitution, federal law comes first. First, you got to get equal population in the districts, then you got to look at minority voting rights. Secondary, you look at communities of interest, which also include race and socioeconomic status, not just neighborhoods. My goodness, this commission hears a lot about neighborhoods, but that consideration is not in the Voting Rights Act, and it is secondary to minority voting rights. Looking at the demographics of the city of Rochester, the Black voting age population is concentrated in an area that we have long called the Crescent. Black voters are more than 50% of the voting age population in this area, and you can create 5 compact and contiguous Black majority districts. The Gingell's test is met for these 5 Black districts. The minority group is large and compact enough. The minority group votes cohesively, and the white majority bloc could defeat the minority candidate. You can't just look at 1 or 2 odd examples. You have to look at elections and patterns over time, and the patterns are clear. The totality of the circumstances of the Crescent, one need only read the Race Commission report on what is going on in our city in this area. This Crescent area has been historically undervalued, experiencing redlining and extreme disinvestment. The area has suffered from a lack of responsiveness from government. 5 districts covering the Crescent would easily enfranchise voters and adhere to the Voting Rights Act. Our second largest minority group is the Hispanic population. They're not large or compact enough for a single Hispanic majority district. Now, you're going to hear a lot of talk about majority-minority plurality districts. That is not allowed under the law when you can create the Black majority district. Now, let's just think for a minute. I want you to think about how you get to where you want to go here with this plurality district and what needs to happen. The first thing is called a crossover district, where a minority group elects a candidate of their choice by combining with white voters. That is rejected by SCOTUS as a district that has protection under the Voting Rights Act. And you could do it, but not at the expense of a Black majority district. The second thing is a coalition district. We're hearing a lot of talk about majority-minority districts as if minority groups vote together. So let's just say for a second, you have a majority-minority district where the minorities vote together. Well, if the Black majority group already forms a minority and everybody's voting together, what do you care? Everyone's already voting together. So you kind of argue against yourself there. And by the way, Congress has never included coalition districts in the Voting Rights Act upon multiple reauthorizations, and the Supreme Court has also not approved any expansion of the VRA to include coalition districts under Section 2 protection. Majority-minority plurality districts are not allowed at the expense of majority Black districts. You cannot create a majority-minority district by aggregating races in a way that dilutes Black voting strength through packing or cracking, in a way that reduces the number of majority Black districts. That would be a violation of the Voting Rights Act, and it would fail the Gingell's test. If you don't like it, take it up with Congress and the Supreme Court. Congress has not made any amendments to the Voting Rights Act to allow majority minority districts that aggregate races for single-member districts. And a conservative Supreme Court will likely not approve such a practice. Our current 2011 map is weak on voting rights. There are only 2 Black majority districts, and I want to tell you where I'm getting this data. We're using Days Redistricting app, which takes its data from the Black voting age population. Those are people, it's defined in the app. They define themselves as Black on the census. And that is also the standard using courts. Cracking is a feature of this map. LDs 21 and 26 have large Black populations that are in the district's minority. LDs 22 and 25 also contain gentrified white areas. Now these lines were formed about 30 years ago in a fight similar to this one over minority districts. Over time, historically Black districts have gotten diluted. It's time to revisit this. And there's also packing on this map. LD 27 has a huge Black majority of voting age population, over 60%. Now let's take a look at the proposals that have come before this commission so far. This is the first ArcBridge map that came out in May. This commission did a lot of work on this map, taking public input, giving ArcBridge a bunch of inputs, but unfortunately, I know you did a lot of work here, but nobody ever asked how many minority districts do we need, and nobody told ArcBridge to look at that issue. So this is a status quo map with 2 majority Black districts. Again, 22 and 27. There's cracking, there's packing, the same map as we have today. It doesn't get us where we need to go on minority voting rights. It doesn't take into account changes over time. It certainly doesn't take into account the law. Now let's take a look at the June map that President Lamar released. This map had no input from Democrats. It was produced by the GOP majority. This map actually has 4 Black majority districts. The problem is, though, it still packs LD 27, which could share some of its voters to get us to 5. This map was a non-starter in the legislature. Negotiations were at an impasse. This brings us to today. This proposal for a 5 majority Black district map. LDs 22, 25, 27, 28, 29, all above 50% Black voting age population. We moved Black voters into 28 and 29. We took them from 21, 26, and 27. 27 had to change. President Lamar and I had some interesting conversations about that. She had to compromise. She didn't want her district to change. We all had to compromise. But we were able to share voters and create 5 districts. White voters in gentrified areas were moved out of 22 and 25. And we pulled in most majority Black election districts. This map was drawn with a bipartisan group of legislators who met 4 times. We agreed at the outset to create 5 Black majority districts. We got an attorney on the phone who told us this is what we had to do. Get to 50% if you can, try to get even more if you can. This kept the focus on the Voting Rights Act when we drew these lines. There were a lot of compromises. The first draft was shared with the caucus, Democratic caucus, on August 23rd. Now we hear an awful lot about compactness. All 5 of these districts are compact. There are no far-flung tentacles. Pretty shapes are not required in the Voting Rights Act. Compactness is not the top criteria under the law. Communities of interest are preserved. Race, economic status are also communities of interest. This is not racial gerrymandering. The Voting Rights Act requires us to draw a Black majority district if groups live close together. This picture here, this was from Cooper versus Harris, a Supreme Court decision in which the Supreme Court said, hey, these districts that the Republicans drew to pack in Black voters, those districts are not compact because they go hundreds of miles and have far-flung tentacles. That's not the case with our 5 districts. Our people live together and they share common interests. It's not just about neighborhoods. And by the way, the crescent doesn't neatly follow neighborhoods. None of these maps neatly follow neighborhoods. This 5 district map is historic for Monroe County. It's the best plan on the table to comply with the Voting Rights Act. It's proportional 5 seats to the Black population. It stops vote dilution via cracking and packing of Black voters. It empowers voters in a long neglected area of the city. One way to think of the Voting Rights Act is when you compare maps, which one best suits the Voting Rights Act? Which one is the most adherent? It's very clear. The 5-district map is the one. We easily drew those 5 districts. Democrats, please support the 5 districts. There was a lot of concern about this map that centered on the city lines. People were very worried about primaries. They were worried about the compactness, which I've just addressed. They were about neighborhood splits, which I've just addressed. And there is a big desire for illegal majority minority districts. They're illegal because of the circumstances here, because we can get to 5. County Executive Adam Bello prefers the Arkridge map from May. He has urged the caucus not to negotiate anymore. He wants to go to court, which I'll address in a moment. I really hope that he will sit down with us and talk about this map. Some caucus members are privately rallying around a 3-black district map. Democrats have simply not returned to the table. This is all about democracy. This is the best political compromise map on the table. This map follows the Voting Rights Act. It's not optional. The 14th and 15th Amendments, it's not optional. And those who want to go to court, if you think this fight is divisive, if you think this fight is ugly, wait till we go to court. And it's not going to be people suing over compactness that will be front in line. It will be Black people who will be front in line getting their 5 districts. And there will be a long paper trail of discriminatory intent throughout this process. So I really warn people about wanting to go to court on this issue. I implore legislators to get back to the table and talk about this. We can't abandon our jobs because we don't like the other people on this other side of the table. We were all elected, all 29 of us. This is our job to do by the charter. We're all legitimate. A map is a statement of values. Many of us have Black Lives Matter signs in our lawns. We marched for Black lives. And now we want to say we can't have 5 Black districts because it hurts other people to have 5 Black districts. How does having 5 Black districts hurt other people? This is like the all lives matter of redistricting. I did not sign up to be part of something that is so filled with hatred and partisan bickering and distrust. This is something that we sat down to do together, and I think we can still. I've been part of a lot of political wars with this caucus, some of them against President Lamar. This isn't one of them. I'm not going to war over democracy here in a way where I have to compromise my values.
Are you like this?
I think
Please be respectful.
I'm fully aware that this map of what it could mean to the power structure, I'm fully aware that it could elect more Black people. When you have more Black people in districts, you have more Black candidates, you empower them. And, you know, a lot of people don't want President Lamar to be able to elect her allies, which would ensure her being president in the future. I don't want President Lamar to be caucusing with the Republicans. I want her to join the Democrats. The road to making that happen is not by rigging democracy, and it's not by turning down this map. We can't control which Black people are elected. We have to empower our community to make those choices and trust voters at the ballot box and go win races. I implore everyone to get back to the table and figure this out and do our jobs. I support this plan. It's the right thing to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Legislator Barnhart, for those important facts. Are there any other legislators who would like to speak?
Absolutely. Unless there's someone else.
I meant someone else out in the audience.
I will speak though, yeah.
You're gonna, you're part of the commission. You'll have an opportunity to do so. I was trying to let the community and the other legislators speak. Thank you. Before I open the floor for discussion, I would just like to echo Legislator Barnhart's sentiments as well as share a few additional thoughts. Several months ago, this commission was launched with the task of completing a redistricting process that fell short last year. As president, I wanted to ensure that this commission revamp its process, improve its community input, and at the end of its work, produce a map with broad community support that puts people over politics. We began by compiling last year's most commonly heard concerns into a list, sent those commonly repeated recommendations to an outside vendor, and received back an initial draft map. The initial draft map was deeply flawed, failing to preserve communities of interest, not meeting all aspects of the Voting Rights Act, and much more. The map served as a starting point for this commission and the community input for the next year and new commission. We took this map across the county of Monroe. There were 6 dedicated public input sessions from the east side to the west side and across the city of Rochester, gathering important information, input, priorities, and suggested changes and more. Following the sessions, I reconvened this commission to discuss the 6 input sessions and community input and put forth a revised map that incorporated them to the best of our ability. The map sparked much discussion, and leadership members of both sides of the legislature agreed to convene to discuss changes to the latest map in order to reach a good faith compromise in the best interest of our community. While that worked great for over 2 months of bipartisan leadership meetings, it slowly became clear that some in the room were not seeking the best interests of this community and adherence to the law, but rather the best interests of themselves and their allegiance to political allies. For weeks, this legislative leadership worked to produce a map in an attempt to make history in Monroe County. A map supported bipartisanly, drawn solely in the interest of community and the law. This can and should be a moment for all of us to be proud of. This map adheres to the Voting Rights Act for the first time in history, creating 5 majority Black districts. The majority Black districts are required to be created, if possible, meet all the standards of the Gingell's test, and empower the historically disenfranchised Crescent and Black voters across the city of Rochester. The map corrects oddly shaped districts in the suburbs of the county while meeting population requirements and remaining competitive without tipping the scales unjustly in one party's favor. The map compiles with federal and state law, preserves communities of interest, makes districts compact, keep villages and towns together to the best extent practical. This map, the bipartisan map before you today, is something that we can and should be extremely proud of. This is a moment in history to correct the wrongs of the past, empower the disenfranchised, and act in the best interest of our communities instead of ourselves. To those who worked to draft this map and support its adoption, I want to thank you, and I know this community thanks you. To those who worked on this map and are considering no longer supporting its adoption or are not in favor, I remind you of the words of the great Dr. Martin Luther King. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We can correct the injustices of the past. We can empower justice today, and I hope that we can all vote in support of this bipartisan map and show everyone that Monroe County Legislature is here for them, not us or our political parties. I want to thank Legislator Barnhart for her time and dedication to this process, the law, and the truth, and thank her for her presentation. With that being said, I will now open the floor for discussion on our first agenda item, directing ArcBridge to produce the presented bipartisan map. We will need a mover and a seconder.
I have some comments myself. So I'm here, right, because I believe representation matters. My fight is not.
I'm sorry, Legislator, we should probably put on the table.
We need to move it in a second, so it's on the table.
I'll move it just for discussion purposes. Yes.
Why were you both allowed to make comments and I can't make a comment
I
prior
didn't
to
make
us
any
voting?
Let's just move it.
We need a
in
moving
second.
I understand, okay. I don't want to, go ahead.
Yeah, second.
I hope everyone's watching
Okay.
what's happening.
Now
I'm
it's
so glad
open for
you're
this. Now it's
Right,
open
now
for
it's open for-
discussion. Go ahead.
Okay.
You have the floor.
I'm fully aware of the process, but it's being a little tweaked here, including the public forum. But in general, yes, you're absolutely correct. There was a bipartisan attempt to come together to talk about what we felt as Democrats would be important for a map moving forward, especially because previously we were completely left out of that discussion. But what inherently happened and occurred is that we were presented with a map. I do not know if conversations happened outside of the room, but that were bipartisan in nature, but we were presented with the map. At that point in time, as you know, I provided that said map to our caucus to look over. When we actually dissected a map that we were given, a map that your caucus, maybe other Democrats were provided opportunity to look at for a long time. When I was provided with 24 hours per se to look at that map, I quickly realized that it was drawn partisan in nature and it split up a community that I could not support. So as a woman of color, I am absolutely sick of being told that I am only capable enough to run an organization or to serve people of color or lead districts that are mainly made up of people of color. I understand the VRA's intent. I know many of you have heard me talk about LD21. The reason we are doing that and the reason we continue to push that reality forward is because we are in essence taking off a majority minority district and allowing it to become majority white. I will not sit here and say that that is okay. It breaks up communities and neighborhoods. It is not compact. You cannot go from St. Paul to East High School, not even the part of St. Paul that is close to East High School, and say that that is a compact district. Packing voters is illegal. It has been mentioned over and over again. We're saying the same terms. And packing refers to placing people of color into the same district in greater numbers than necessary to elect candidates of color. LD29 has not historically had an issue of electing people of color. That is textbook packing of voters. We just received something, when I got here, that said this particular individual was appalled at the entire area that supported a candidate, Wanda, to be removed from Barnhart's district and replaced with white people. I'm glad someone's paying attention because, again, the question remains, and we've only talked about bingos, but there's other court cases. There are court cases that talk about the pure intent of the VRA to elect individuals of color in districts that we're not talking about. Joseph Burns provided an actual legal opinion to this commission, and that legal opinion says exactly what I'm fighting. Nothing is absolute. This is not the only way these districts can be drawn. And we need more representation, more opportunities. Legislator Barnhart came up here and said 5. We can elect 5 Black people if we have these districts. That is completely against what I'm trying to do here. Elect more representation because we know, just as a general premise, when boards are more diverse, they function better. That is all I am saying. We are not doing our community a service by removing a competitive district in representation. I can keep going on to say LD26 has a higher representation of white folks, but here I am. It can happen. And that is why I will not be voting in support of this map, nor this piece of legislation that has already been written that that none of the Democrats on this commission have had a part of. I understand another Democrat might have, but this commission is what matters. This commission is what used to have the legal requirements to be able to do this, because we're out of that window. Thank you. We were presented with a map. We had, as was mentioned, 4 meetings. We discussed what we believed was appropriate for Democrats things that were talked about here that weren't in the Arc Bridge B map. Arc Bridge B, when we sat at this table and we were told as Democrats that that map was drawn by Republicans and Sabrina Lamar, President Lamar. So yes, we came to the table to have that kind of conversation.
Did you ever bring a map with you? I've never seen this
Whatever
three
was
black
pro-
district map floating around while I can bring that to the commission.
why did I not bring it to the commission? Because for us, it's about the philosophies behind those maps. We'll be able to share, right? It isn't our,
really
what
hard
we
for you.
decided as a commission was that we would put forth principles. And we
Well,
stayed.
sometimes we have to draw a map because Jackie and I are gonna have.
Excuse
to-
me.
Arc Bridge was the
Excuse me.
individual who's drawing that map. Okay.
Legislator Roman,
Yes.
I appreciate what you said.
Mhm.
I also believe that it's important if we're gonna tell the story, that we tell the entire story, instead of just pulling out pieces of the process that we want to share.
Mhm.
We've been doing this for the last 6-9 months. We knew that redistricting was coming. Just like I had an opportunity to submit some lines to this commission, the Democratic caucus also was afforded that same opportunity and chose not to. Not one map was presented to this commission from the Democratic caucus. It's only been a lot of hate towards the maps that are presented. That's it. We did meet offline and we talked about the maps. There were some recommendations that came from you
Yes.
and were implemented in this new map.
So, absolutely.
When we finished the conversation, everybody was in agreement that the map was good.
That is not true.
And then a week later, it was a problem. In that process, I had certain members of the Democratic caucus call and say very disturbing things throughout this process, including desperate pleas to remove Black voters from certain districts, protect against primary opponents, and more politically motivated asks that is not what the commission is here to do, and I was appalled to hear such things. I had legislators calling me, asking me if I can move more white voters into a Black district just so they can win. You mentioned Wanda. I wasn't gonna mention it, but there was a legislator that called me and asked me if I can move Wanda Street out of his district for fear of a primary. So when we sit here and we talk about the Voting Rights Act and who we're trying to protect, it's important to ask legislators to tell the entire story, because everyone is not telling the truth. I've been in this process. I've been doing what I said that I was going to do. If anyone call and ask a question, I'm very transparent about what's going on, not just in this process, but throughout my legislative duties. I'm very transparent about what's going on, but others are not. This is not about what's right for minority, majority districts. This is self-interest. There have been multiple conversations about redistricting that have nothing to do with the law, has everything to do with making sure that whatever I put on the table will not get passed.
Ms. Lamar,
So-
can we try to stay within the context of our agenda and talk about the maps?
Absolutely.
And not get name calling on either side?
Yes, so with there being no further discussion, will the clerk please call the roll? Oh, I'm sorry,
Yes.
Jackie.
So, thank you. I guess I just had a couple of comments for myself and explain what my vote would actually be today. And I think the presentation that we had today was a prime example of why I believe, just like Plan B, this new map was wholly created outside of this commission and the vendor for whom was contracted to do the work. I understand side meetings, whatever may have had happened, but this commission was to exist for a reason. And it was for us to come up with a consensus list of priorities and for the vendor to be able to assist us in creating these maps. Unfortunately, in my opinion, this process has completely gone awry, or lack thereof, and fell apart the moment that Plan B presented itself here at this commission. And to be honest, I'm not entirely sure why this commission even exists, as it is a formality of what must be done based on obviously the rules of the legislature. And I think we need to be honest moving forward and revamping this entire process for future generations here. But obviously that is a much larger topic on how this should proceed in the future. I do not believe that we have properly reviewed the community input as we were charged to do. I do not believe that we have met the legal requirements of components such as compactness that should have been top of mind in our decisions. And while I see that there are some positive aspects, right, to this new map that has transpired, I do question the efforts to review the largest growing minority community in this city, in this county, in this state, in this country, and that is the Latinx Hispanic community. And I heard a lot of things here today, which again, positive for many communities. I feel like this one was thrown in the trash. And it is the largest growing population that we have, again, in the city, county, state, and country. And to not be able to squeak out even one majority minority district based on that population, I'm a little disappointed. Again, I'm just not sure as to the efforts that were put into place to do a full review and opportunity for taking a look at those types of things. In any event, I do have some additional concerns, and that is both the timing and the budget. And the timing, as Ms. Nicolay started to state here, it is of the utmost importance. Whatever transpires from this point forward, I urge us all, we have to move more quickly. It is imperative that the Board of Elections have the time that it needs in order to implement whatever the final outcome is here, in order to ensure accuracy of the data, right? The longer this process moves forward or continues on, the harder it will be for this board to complete its legal obligations in getting things done and ready for designation and elections that need to be had come next year. So please, I urge everyone, we need to move quickly on this. I hope that we can come to some sort of consensus in the next steps moving forward here, but that is one of my major concerns. And the second is budget. There was a statement that just now in terms of the proposal and moving this to Arc Bridge. Arc Bridge contract is done and paid for. $19,658 or something of that nature has already been utilized. There is no money left, to my knowledge, to be able to contract with Arc Bridge to be able to move forward to the next step. So I'm not sure if we as a commission or if it's the legislature at this point must talk about how do we engage this vendor or a different vendor or something, because at this point in time, there are, I believe, are not enough funds in this process in order for us to do the work that still is left to be completed. And that is extremely critical in order to recreate, make compliant, so on and so forth for this next step. So I put that on the table as part of this commission that we have not been talking about and is a very real finite number of dollars that we need left in the budget. So that's where I am.
Sure. I guess I am a lifelong Republican and I've been in this business a very long time. And I would say up until today, Legislator Barnhart and I probably had nothing in common, as well as Ms. Wilt. I would consider them probably the enemy, if you will, in my career as a Republican. So if I am willing to listen to their sides and accept what they think is appropriate for these districts to look like, and there may be other Democrats, including President Lamar, she's not a Republican, they are not Republicans. I feel like we have a very, very much bipartisan effort here. The community is always saying, do things bipartisanly. Politicians are always saying, I'm going to work bipartisanly. Well, this is about as bipartisan as I've ever seen it go. And it's really disappointing that I think you guys are not going to support this. One, because it is truly a bipartisan map. Two, because you have brought nothing to the table. It's really easy to be in the minority and just complain about what everybody does, but not have any solutions. That's a personal thing for me. And also, if the group here decides that we are going to forward this to Arc Bridge, we do have $875 left in our contract. I spoke with them. They can make us a new map for that amount or less. So don't, that's not anything necessary to worry about. That's all. I have. Thank you, Madam President.
There being no further discussion, will the clerk please call the roll?
I have one more statement, though I appreciate what you shared, both legislator Barnhart and the other individual, Robin Wolf, do not live in these communities. I'm telling you what individuals from the communities are saying in regard to them not being able to know who their legislators are.
Nobody needs to know what our is.
But that shouldn't be a deciding factor.
I
That
don't
shouldn't
even
be,
know what the legislature does.
that shouldn't be a deciding factor. I'm not gonna sit here and say.
It's not a deciding factor.
Okay, with there being no further discussion, will the clerk please call the roll?
Mr. Colby.
We're voting on sending
This
this,
is directing ArcBridge to produce the updated, changed map.
and when they produce that, then it becomes more readily available on the map, on the website?
Yes,
Yes. My vote.
Mr.
No, no.
Colby votes yes.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Ms. Nicolay.
Yes.
Ms. Nicolay votes yes. Ms. Ortiz. Ms. Ortiz votes no. Ms. Roman.
No, I think that there's a question in regards to actually what we're voting on.
This is sending it
To
our
our
vendor
bridge.
to produce the map.
Is that your understanding?
Well, this is just a roll call.
Correct. That's what we're voting.
We're voting,
Okay,
we're voting on what I see as number 4 in our agenda.
Yes, we're on.
okay, I'm sorry, I lost my place.
Ms. Roman, sorry.
No, still no, but
Ms. Roman votes no. Chairwoman Lamar.
Yes,
Chairwoman Lamar votes yes. 3-2. Motion to direct ArcBridge to produce an updated map passes.
I would now like to hold a roll call vote to put forward the map that we just voted to the full ledge.
I make a motion that we approve or send this to the full ledge for their review after ArcBridge gets done with their update. So second,
Sure, I'll second it.
Is there any discussion?
I have some discussion. So it's my understanding that when ArcBridge,
This is just to vote the map, to move the map out of the commission, not, that's it.
I understand that, and to present it to the full legislature.
Yeah, correct.
But my understanding is when ArcBridge B was presented to ArcBridge. So when this commission produced a map last time, when the Republicans and.
June 30th map.
Thank you, June 30th map, when that map was produced, it was sent to ArcBridge. ArcBridge did make some tweaks to that map based on legalities, based on population. Yes, adjustments had to be made, is that correct?
I don't recall actually.
Yes.
Sure.
Okay.
Okay, let's go with that, sure.
Yes, it was. So are we gonna say we're asking them for legal opinion again on this
No,
map?
we're telling them what to do. We're telling them to draw the map.
Okay. And not taking into consideration packing.
The law.
Okay. So they will be taking into consideration the law, or they just be told to blindly draw this map?
The law is priority.
Okay, all right. I just needed to understand that.
There being no further discussion, will the clerk please call the roll?
Mr. Colby.
yes,
Mr. Colby votes yes. Ms. Nicolay.
Yes.
Ms. Nicolay votes yes. Ms. Ortiz.
No.
Ms. Ortiz votes no. Ms. Roman.
No.
Ms. Roman votes no. Chairwoman Lamar.
Yes,
Chairwoman Lamar votes yes. 3-2. Motion recommending final draft map and local law be presented to the legislature. Passes.
thank you. Thank you to the public both this year and last year for your recommendations and your continued participation. Thank you to the commission members for your service. Thank you to the members of the legislature who have contributed to this process. I truly believe a majority of us have attempted to do the right thing. I look forward to seeing this map move forward. Thank you all again for your participation. We will now adjourn this legislative